Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Todd Burley. I told Todd when Brennan got a full-time job that I'm probably getting rested up enough where I can take on some Wednesday night teaching and spell them a little bit. I just want to congratulate and thank Todd for all the work that he's put into keeping us on track as we've gone through Joshua, as the kids have gone through Joshua, as they have, there's just a lot of stuff here, and I cannot imagine the Bible Bowl questions that those kids are going to have to answer. We're going to look at chapters 14 and 15. I'm going to tell you a little story. This number of years ago, before we moved to Ponca City, I was scheduled to preach on a certain Sunday and couldn't, and so I had a backup plan, and another fellow preached, and so I came back and I had this really, really good lesson on the story of Jonah. And I presented that lesson with as much vigor and energy as I could, and it was like preaching to a brick wall. There was no response. I thought, I'm really bad. So afterwards, I learned that the guest speaker the week before talked about Jonah. So when Andrew gets up and he selects Joshua 14 and the story of Caleb, I thought, well, we're going to have a 10-minute class because we're going to talk about some of that same thing tonight. So hopefully this will be a lot of fun. We're looking at chapters 14 and 15. You're going to have to trigger it the first time, I guess. There it is. Can't see that very well, I don't think. I love maps, I love detail. But when you can't read the detail, they're not fun. So what I did is I found the next one there. I found one that has a little color to it. And what I like about this is it demonstrates something or several things that are kind of interesting. Look at what Manasseh inherited. They got Manasseh East and Manasseh West. That's a lot of territory. And who's Manasseh's brother? The other part of Joseph's? Ephraim down. He apparently didn't have that many children or something, but Manasseh had a lot of kids and inherited a significant amount of land. There's something else that's kind of interesting. What do you notice about the inheritance to Judah? What's right in the middle of Judah? Simeon. Unless you study the book, you don't realize that the middle section of Judah's inheritance is the land that was given to Simeon. So think about it, when the tribes divided, and we call them the northern 10 tribes, there weren't 10 tribes that went north. Because Simeon and Judah and Benjamin and, what's the other one? I can't read it. There are 4 of them that stayed together to form Judah. By the way, if I squeak or squeal, it's because I ran into a tree, and I've been wearing a sling, and so it's not on tonight. So if I just do something dumb with my right arm, the noise, just don't worry about it. But anyway, it's interesting to look at a map that's got lots of different coloration to it so you can see the distinctiveness. And there's some weird things there. For example, see Gad? Gad has fingers that go up on both sides of Manasseh East. Gad, the Gadarenes. Does that ring a bell? Remember the man that had this legion was from the Gadarenes? He was a Gadite. And you can see why now, because Gad's land goes up to the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. So just by looking at maps, you learn and are reminded of a lot of things. We'll probably come back to this from time to time. But having some nice colored maps in your Bible is good and helpful. Well, go ahead and switch to the next one there. Let's look at the division of Israel's inheritance here. Let's read through the first 5 verses and look at some points on the board here. So starting with verse 1, it says, "These are the inheritances that the people of Israel received in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the fathers' houses and the tribes of the people of Israel gave to them to inherit. Their inheritance was by lot, just as the Lord had commanded by the hand of Moses for the 9.5 tribes. For Moses had given an inheritance to the 2.5 tribes beyond the Jordan, but to the Levites he gave no inheritance to them. For the people of Joseph, there were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, and no portion was given to the Levites in the land, and but cities to dwell in, with their pasture and their livestock and their substance. The people of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. They allotted the land. So we can read past this and miss some things. It's fascinating to me that after they haven't really conquered the whole land yet. There's still a lot of battles to be waged. But the major kings and their territory, especially in the southern part of the country, have been conquered. And so the land is now starting to be divided up. Now, if you wanted a certain piece of land, how would you get it? You'd squabble over it, right? You think of the land run and the massive challenge of getting a piece of land during these land runs in Oklahoma. Well, God provided a method so there wouldn't be any squabbling. Notice that it says here, who's involved in this partitioning? He says that there's, besides Joshua, there's Eleazar the priest, and then there are the fathers, the heads of the fathers in the house of the houses of the tribes of Israel, and they're gathered together. Now, they're going to use a method we're going to talk about in a minute called casting lots. But what are they actually going to do? Who has actually pre-established the boundaries? God has. Before they went into the land, they knew what areas they were going to get. Now, there may have been some specific little lines here and there they didn't quite understand yet, but God's going to take care of that, and a good example of it is in chapters 14 and 15 when Judah receives an allotment. Great detail is given. So there was order and there was method to this process. If you're going to go into a court of law, if you're going to go into a discussion with someone, you want integrity to be a key factor. You want to know that everybody was above board, and even though if you walked out being the loser in a case or a situation, you know it was handled well. Well, here God has provided a method by which there can be absolutely no question about who is going into what part of the land. And so it says the land was divided by God by lot. And lot is an interesting concept here. And if you go on to the next page there, well, here's some other things that we'll talk about before we get there. But it's interesting, this concept of dividing by lot, and we'll talk about it in a minute. Okay, you got it. So you look at this phrase, casting lots or by lots. So the word casting kind of translates to something like casting a fishing pole. You're throwing something, you're tossing something. And a lot, if you look it up and research it, you get pages and pages of stuff that says we really don't know what it means. But it seems to be that there were certain kinds of objects, stones or twigs or something, that were marked in some way so that the result could be easily understood. And so I want you to understand that God is really in charge of this casting of lots. This wasn't just a by chance thing. This was the tool that God chose to show his decision. There were 3 ways in Scripture that God gave an interpretation or a decision. One was by casting of lots, one was by prophets, and one was by dreams. And these were the 3 ways that God used. So we don't know exactly what these lots look like, but we do read, and if you'd go on to the next one, we do read a lot of things. I mean, there's about 70 times in the Old Testament where a decision was made by casting of lots, and they abided by that decision. There's about 7 or 8 times in the New Testament where the early church used lots. Can you think of one in particular? Think of a time when lots were used? Yeah, we need one more. And so in Acts 1, we're casting lots to see which of these 2 guys is going to become the next apostle. And the idea is that God is making the choice. God is making the decision. This isn't just chance, but God is using it. And I want you to pay particular attention to that well, this isn't the exact same slide. We'll get to it in a minute. But God says, I'm the one that is making the choice. I'm the one that when you're doing it right, I'm the one that is answering your question or doing it the right way. So we'll look at some of these other scriptures in just a minute. But I want you to understand that the people had full confidence in this process. That there is never an indication that there was a dispute or something. This is the way that God decided. You've got Joshua, you've got the chief priest, you've got the heads of the families. It's all above board. And then God is then through the lot casting, making some decisions here. But those decisions are actually based upon what he's told Moses already. So you've got what Moses said a few chapters before, not in great detail. We learn what those details are here. And then you've got the process that they're going through here now that they're in the promised land. So in Numbers chapter 26, you can see the land shall be, this is in, Moses talking. The land shall be divided by lot according to the names and the number of the tribes and of the fathers that they will inherit. There is some discussion, and you can't find it here, as to what cities certain families would go into and live, and that was a part of the casting of lots. We don't know that. But somehow, you've got a big bunch of people like Manasseh. What cities are they supposed to go to? Everybody might run to one big city and leave the rest of the cities out unpopulated. So it may have been that the lots were used also to determine what family, what clans went to what cities. We're not told, but that's a pretty good assumption. Now, in Proverbs chapter 16, there's an interesting statement here. It says, the lot is cast into the lap, and every decision is from the Lord. Might infer how it was done. We really honestly don't know what it means to cast lots. It was just the decision-making process. Now, there's another method that God used, and it was through a couple of unique objects called the Urim and the Thummim. You ever hear of them? It's only used a few times in Scripture. And they were two objects. We believe they were stones sewed into a pouch that it was inside the breastplate and the ephod that the high priest wore. And it was worn over the heart of the high priest. So he's got this breastplate with these 12 precious stones on it. And then behind that, there's a pouch. And in this pouch are two objects called the Urim and the Thummim. And these were used by the high priest to make certain decisions, God speaking through these stones, or whatever they were, to tell the priest what the decision was being. We don't see a lot of that being referred to in Scripture, and we don't think that that's what's being used here. So it's just kind of fascinating to me that there is order and method, and the decisions are being made. And I like what it says in verse 4 there, that, and no portion was given to the Levites in the land, but only the cities to dwell in, and their pasture lands and their livestock and their substance. There's a slide that's got the Levites on it there if you want to find that one. But why do you think the Levites didn't get distribution?
Because they were the priests, and each tribe would need a priestly presence.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord was their inheritance.
The Lord was their inheritance. That's what Scripture said. The Lord was their inheritance. And so, kind of a combination of both answers. They were not, what if you have a land to worry about, and you're also a priest, where are your priorities going to be? Their work was, eventually down in, we don't even have Jerusalem set up yet. That's many years away. But their responsibility was to serve the community in which they lived, right? And so, as I say, if you have a land allotment to the Levites, they've got a concern on keeping the land going and harvesting it. Well, they weren't farmers. They were kind of ranchers in a way, but their job was to serve and teach the local people. It's a long time yet before they're getting together at a tabernacle or anything like that. We still have that to build. That's a ways off. But a few things up here. The Levites received certain towns within the borders of other tribes to help them to be their tool. Remember, they didn't have a Bible. The only Bible they had was what the Levites had, and they, of course, didn't have complete copies. So they had to come together and come up with a method by which they're going to teach the people the law, which didn't work too well. In chapter 13, verse 33, it says that the Lord himself was the inheritance to the Levites. What do you think that means? The Lord was the inheritance to the Levites.
That they dedicated themselves to serving him and being the
Yeah, he has given himself, if you will, to the Levites, and the Levites then disperse that, his knowledge, to the people. And so, again, they don't have a need. They don't. Their time is needed to preach and teach the word and not be involved in ranching and all of these other things that they could get involved with. And yeah.
Land is producing, and their income or profit or whatever was the tithes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was God's money given for God, a tenth, and then given to Levites, and then sacrifices many times they could eat of the food.
Right. I mean, God is going to provide for them, and that part of the tithe would go to them. Part of the sacrifices would go to them. So God has made a method available for them to survive and therefore serve the people. And it says in verse 5, the people of Israel did as God commanded Moses, and they allotted the land. I just like that phrase. The people did what was commanded by Moses. They did it. They didn't have a question. They believed in the authenticity of the decisions that were being made. So now we come to this story of Caleb, if you can find Caleb's slide. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal. And Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God in Kadesh Barnea, according to you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought a word that was in my heart. But my brethren went up and brought a word that made the hearts of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land in which your feet have trodden shall be your inheritance for you and your children forever, because you wholly followed the word of God, wholly followed the Lord my God." And so we have Caleb now. He's now about 85 years old. And he's going to go on to say some things about his physical condition. But he's reminding everybody, including Joshua, that God has made a promise to him. And that promise was, if you could go back and find that map at the early part there, that's good. He's going to give him the area that ultimately, right down in there, a little town called Hebron. Not called that yet. He's going to rename it. And we'll read more about it in a minute. But down in there is where he apparently did the spying out. And there's a slide that's got guys carrying a bunch of grapes there. There you go. So Caleb, like Joshua, brought back a favorable report. Why did the people not want to advance and take the land, the other 10 spies? What was their problem?
They were afraid of the people that lived there.
They had big people. Guess what town he's going to be given? He's going to be given the capital city of the Anakites, the big guys, the Goliath type people. These are the 7, 8, 9 foot tall people. Remember, the Israelites are not overly tall. They're probably average height of about 5 foot, or if not that. So the 5 foot guy, a 9 foot guy, if you're not fearing God, you're going to think there's no way we're going to do this. But Caleb and Joshua brought back a good report. So he and Joshua survived the 40 years of the wandering in the wilderness. And notice what it says here next in our reading. He says, and now and behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, for these 45 years. So he's 85 years old, since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old, and I am still as strong this day as I was when Moses sent me. Keith, are you as strong as you were at 40? I'm not as strong as when I was, 3 days ago. This guy must have been quite a character. We're not told a lot about him, but I would love to be able to spend some time with him. Still as strong as he was when he was 40 and did this spying out. I just love him saying that. And my strength is the same as when was going and coming. So now give me the hill country in which the Lord spoke to you on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, their great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will bless me and be with me, and I shall drive them out as the Lord has said. So you've got this small guy that's 85 years old that says, I'm going to go take care of these Anakites that are over there in this hill country. So that's exactly what happens. Then Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, as an inheritance. Therefore Hebron became an inheritance to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord. That's the third time we read this phrase. He wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. And the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba, Arba being the greatest of the men of Anakim, and the land was at rest from war. So here we have Caleb, and it's going to talk a little bit more about Caleb in the next chapter. I don't know if we're going to get there completely tonight, but the point is that he was going to go in and take over his hill country, which is controlled by these big guys. Watching some of the early NBA games in a year, you see all these huge, big guys playing, and they run up against the small little guys that are on a team that's rebuilding, and you think, how are they ever going to do this? And then all of a sudden, the short guys win. Well, they used finesse and they used the tools they had to win over the tall guys.
It was God's will, the same as with David.
Yep.
Up against Goliath.
And that's what he says right in here. What he says, if God's with me, this will happen. And so he takes over the hill country and he beats the Anakim, drives them out. And it's interesting that he now has this area, not only just Hebron, but the area around it. And there's some springs there that we come to in chapter 15. But just a note about the Anakim there that we noted before. If you want to go back to that slide, sorry that the machine isn't working right for us today. Now, it's about the Anakim. You had it up a minute ago. The Anakimites, or the Anakim, descendants of these large people. We don't know if Goliath was of this group. It may have had some of that DNA in him. But the point is, as Max stated, it doesn't matter how big your enemy is. If God is with you, you're bigger. And that's one thing we should walk away from this lesson with, is he was brave and courageous and dedicated, and he fully followed what the Lord told him to do. So there's another great example. 3 times, I believe, in this chapter it says that. So Caleb drove the Anakim from the area and took over. And, of course, his small clan is now going to possess that part, and there's some more on it in the next chapter. So let's read on to 15. The allotment of the tribe of the people of Judah, according to the clans, reached southward and to the boundary of Edom, and we're going to stop reading there. Because for the next many verses, we have the border, and you can go back to that map now. I'm driving you nuts there. Notice the purple area. That whole purple area is going to be outlined little bitty section by little bitty section by little bitty section. But the point is that God is allotting to Judah in very great detail what their land is going to be like. Now, this is the only place where this kind of detail is provided. Now, you know good and well that there's lots of other detail for all of the other tribes in the land that they're going to receive. And I think this has given us a good example of the detail, knowing where each boundary was, because God knew exactly where he wanted people to sit. Remember earlier, Joshua has sent out groups to not spy out the land as much as to measure the land. And now they've come back. They know exactly where the tree is, and you go 30 yards from that tree to this rock, and you go over to the mouth of the Jordan River, and they know this land like the back of their hand. They've been waging war in here for 5 or 6 years, and now they know it very, very well. Besides that, God knows exactly where every rock and creek are. So that's really what starts in basically verse 2, 15 and verse 2, and starts talking about all of the intricate detail that they go into to describe where this boundary is. Now, if you're buying a piece of property, you'd kind of like to know exactly what you're buying, and so you would hire a surveying company to go out with their instruments and measure out and drive stakes and lay out, this is your property, and here's a picture of it. Well, that's essentially what they're doing, is they're drawing this word picture of everything that's going to be within the boundary of Judah. And Judah's got a lot of clans, a lot of families. And we're going to read, I'm not going to read, but you can read through a lot of the rest of the chapter that talks about all of the different cities within just the restricted area of Judah alone. These are cities. Well, these cities have people in them that need to be driven out. And what are they supposed to be doing? They're not being, all right, we're going to take over your house. They're going to have a war with each of these cities because they're told to annihilate the people here. They're also told to do something else. Not only annihilate the people, but they're told to do what with their gods? They're supposed to knock down the Asherahs and everything else, destroy all of these gods. God doesn't want anything like that in the land or the people that were worshiping them. So when you read through this long list of cities that are listed here, starting with about verse 13, you're going to see every single city that needed to be cleansed. There's war in every one of those cities. There's temples and there's gods and there's all kinds of ungodly things throughout this whole area that need to be cleansed. And so, you just pass through and you find out, well, it's just a bunch of names. Why did God put this in here? I think he's showing us the detail which he wanted these people to go to and through to clear the land.
And John, I was going to say, sometimes when we read Joshua, I know I do, when we study it and think, well, he's given the Israelites the promised land, but another reason he's doing this is he's punishing the people that have been there for this long because of their sinful activities that have just degraded them to, basically nothing good from them. So it's a punishment.
Yep.
So not only do we think about like Babylon and other nations that punished the Israelites, but the Israelites were also a vessel of punishment against sinful activities from these people as well.
How effective were they in doing it, though? Oh, to some degree, but they let too many survive.
Hebrew scholar. He said the Israelites were never faithful to God. He says never. If they were, it was only for a very, very short period of time.
Yeah, this is probably the most faithful period that we see here, is because they're trying to cleanse this land out. But I wanted to hit a couple of interesting things. I will let you read through all of these names and whatever. But I wanted to jump to verse 13 and read up to about verse 19 and talk about Caleb here again. According to the commandment of the Lord Joshua, he gave Caleb the son of Jephunneh a portion among the people of Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak. And Caleb drove out the three sons of Anak, Shishni and Iamin and Telmai, and the descendants of Anak. He drove them out. Little guys driving out the big guys because God is on their side. And he went up against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, whoever strikes Kiriath Sepher and conquers it, to him I will give Achish, however you want to say it, my daughter, as a wife. Now here is a motivation. If Aksha, or whatever her name is a very fair maiden, you're going to have guys lined up to take this town. Well, obviously somebody thought a lot of her because Othniel, the son of Caiz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, and he gave him Asheth, his daughter, as a wife. Now, she's a smart girl. When she came to him, I think that is when she and Othniel were talking, she urged him to ask her father for a field. And so she got off her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? And I just given you away in your back. What do you want? And he said, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negev, give me also the springs of water. And he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Now, I don't know how many springs they had, but it kind of sounds like that she got all the springs. And this is important to me for several reasons. First of all, dad kind of favors daughters, you know. And secondly, I think there's probably a lot going on here we don't know, but there's, if you read it over real quickly, you see, you know, it just kind of sounds like they had a little skirmish here and there and it's over. But I think really there's probably a lot of work in accomplishing, conquering this city and the other cities around it. And so there's probably a point of pride here. And so he has given his daughter this land. He's given her the springs. And what do you do with land and springs? You farm, you survive. So he has given her and her offspring a significant inheritance. They don't have to worry about, you know, staying alive like a lot of other people have to. And so it's just kind of fascinating to me that here you have a guy that just didn't keep everything to itself. He was already now parceling out property as an inheritance. Any comment on that? Anything strike you in this reading? Well, I wanted to end, this is going to be just about right. I wanted to end on, bring up the slides on Jerusalem. And we continue, we start in verse 20, and we start going through all of the cities that we talked about, and I'll leave that to you. You may get a lot out of reading that. I know that Stacy is the master of pronouncing all of these words, and if you want to, you can set up a study time with him, and he'll tell you how to pronounce them. But the point is, this is the only one of all of these tribes that goes into such great detail in talking about what the division was and what the detail is regarding all these cities. But it says down here in verse 63, but, the sentence starts out, but the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the people of Judah, could not drive out. So the Jebusites dwell in the city of Judah at Jerusalem to this day. Now the to this day alludes to the time in which the book was written. We're not exactly sure when it was written. Probably in, you know, the time of the judges that's coming up next. Not exactly sure. That phrase to this day appears 4 or 5 times, I think, in the book. But it's interesting to me that this story falls on the heels of Caleb taking over the hill country, driving out the big people, and yet Judah could not drive out the people from the city of Jerusalem. So, you know, consider the concept of faith for just a minute and obedience. But it's interesting, the city that we're talking about, you can see outlined in black there. And there's a couple of things about this I think is kind of interesting. The city of David essentially is what you see outlined in black. Now, we're talking about 1300, 1350 BC here. We're told that David in 2 Samuel, finally conquered the city. And when did he rule? About 950. 950, 1050, 1150, 1250. It's 400 years before Judah actually acquires, and it's David that acquires this city. Where was the faith? Getting back to what Max said, they didn't stay with it very long. They didn't do what they should have done. But the interesting thing to me is, as you look at this picture, you see where David put his palace when he lived there and whatever. He began to expand the city. And there's one thing he did. If you see at the very top of the left picture especially, you see the threshing floor of Arnea. Well, that threshing floor is on one of two hills. And you can kind of see the two hills. The city of David is sitting on one hill, and the threshing floor is on the other hill. And there's a valley, a little narrow valley between the two. Where the threshing floor is where the temple would be eventually built, top of Mount Moriah. But how do you get from there to the city of David when you have to go through a little valley? So one thing that Solomon did is he filled in that valley. And so just an interesting point is he filled in that valley so that the city could continue to expand. And I've got at the end a picture of all of, well, not all, but a picture of Jerusalem where you can see some of that. You notice that to the left side on the black and white picture, you see what seems to be ridges and a rise up to the next plateau. That's all in houses. That little valley that's through there, that Typhron Valley, doesn't really exist anymore. They've built it into this city. So if you go to the very last picture, you'll see what's happened here. You see the Dome of the Rock. Then do you kind of get the idea there's just a little depression and then it goes up to where the big white buildings are? That's that valley. And the Kidron Valley that goes around below, that's a 4-lane highway. It's a lot different today than it was in 950 when David took it over. But that is a picture of modern Jerusalem, or a part of modern Jerusalem. And it was a city that took 400 years to be conquered because I believe the people did not do what the early people said. They did according to the will of God. So we've done 14 and some of 15. If you want to hit part of 15 next week or whatever, it's just fascinating to think about what these people went through and all of the warfare, and yet God was always on their side and helped them get to where they are. All right, Jerry.